who is here live in our church in Lebanon, and hopefully those of you who are live on our live stream. I know we had a little bit of issues with the scheduled one, but hopefully you got over into the AmiciMusic live stream where we are now. We want to thank you who are coming in to help support the folks in Asheville, North Carolina. Many of you know that I lived in Asheville, and I have a music series there called AmiciMusic. I was supposed to go there next week for concerts, but they are in the middle of a terrible cleanup. Most of the people there still have no water, and some have no power, and many have no internet. So this is a program that we are, all of the proceeds from this concert will go down to two different organizations down there, one called Arts Asheville, which has supported all of the artists and musicians and writers for many years in Asheville, and right now they're just currently trying to help those who lost either their home or unfortunately the River Arts District, where many people had all of their artwork was largely washed away in the floods, so their livelihood is gone. So they are very helpful with that, and so you can donate to the Arts Asheville. There is a link on the YouTube video to do that. If you can't figure out how to use the link, you can find their addresses, I think, online. If you can't do either of those, you can send a check and to AmiciMusic, and I will send everything down to them. The address for AmiciMusic, if you need that, 509 Maupas Avenue, M-A-U-P-A-S, in Savannah, Georgia, 30401. But hopefully you can find a way to just get this money directly into those who, either the Arts Asheville or the other organization is the White Horse Black Mountain, an incredible place to play music that I performed, one of the first places that AmiciMusic performed, but they are just a community, beautiful community center, and right now they have stopped all music and are just a gathering place for those who need grief help and healing and supplies. They have free supplies, including, I think, free beer. So it's just a great organization, but they need to be able to pay their staff and help others. So you can also donate directly to White Horse, and their link is up there. And again, anybody in live, you can go and check out all of that as well. But we are doing this for everybody here, there in Asheville. I'm thinking of all of my friends there, and we hope that you're able to see this incredible show, and hopefully we can do more of this. I know we have many months of cleanup to do there. So this is going to be a very fun program that's called a fabulous four-hand frolic. I love alliteration, as you know, and we have a great pianist working with me as we take over the choreography of the piano. Many of you know Elizabeth Borowsky, who is a Baltimore legend. Their whole family, many of you have met Emmanuel and Francis, violin and cello, and her mother, Cecilia Barczyk, also a fantastic cellist. They have been performing together since they were very young kids in Baltimore and then all around the world. 10 years ago, Elizabeth moved up into this area and has done remarkable work as a pedagogue and just in the whole musical community to bring people together. So it's always wonderful to be able to perform with Elizabeth. She has all her life played piano trios with violin and cello, but really didn't have another pianist to play with. So it's been fun to work out the four-hand piano literature with her and do some great pieces, including at the very end today, a fantastic arrangement that some of you have probably heard of, Rhapsody in Blue, which is celebrating its 100th birthday this year. And it is just an amazing piece every time I play it, and I've played it many times. But before we get to Rhapsody in Blue, we're going to begin with, on the first half, two pieces from France. First piece by Georges Bizet, and then one by Gabriel Fauré. We'll take about a 10-minute break. There are two bathrooms in the back for those who are live. You guys do your own bathrooms. We will come back for the second half. We'll do a work by Amy Beach, who is a wonderful woman composer from New Hampshire, actually, who's finally getting her due after too many years being neglected. And we will finish with that wonderful Rhapsody in Blue. So we begin with Georges Bizet, whose actual full name was Alexander Caesar Leopold Georges Bizet. If you got that many names, you're going to be famous, I think. And he was an amazing prodigy, by most accounts, one of the great pianists as a 12 or 13-year-old, went to the Paris Conservatory, started composing there, and quickly was seen as one of the best composers. And he won the Prix de Rome, which is sort of the key prize if you're a composer. If you win that, you get to spend 3 years in Rome at the Medici place down there amongst all sorts of other artists, and you get to really create So there was a lot of promise for Bizet. But when he came back to write music in France in around 1860, he really struggled to get critics to like his music. He wrote a couple operas, a symphony, and they just thought it didn't have any good melodies. It was too pedantic and intellectual, which is hard to believe because he writes some of the great melodies, but he really struggled. This is one of the first pieces that people sort of said, hey, that's a pretty good work. And it comes out in 1872. It's called Les Arlésiennes, the girl from Arles, and it actually was originally incidental music for a play of that same name. And the play was kind of a dark play about, it took place in Arles in Provence, southern France, and it was kind of a love affair and a suicide and kind of miserable. And so the director of the theater, it was called the Theater Vaudeville, was a friend of Bizet, and he thought maybe a little music could lighten up the horror of the play. As he said, the play is a little too somber for my theater, but I think the music will be a powerful attraction, and it will soften somewhat the cruelty of the play. He was wrong about that. The play was a disaster. It closed after about 12 shows. But Bizet had written such good music for this play that his friend said, you've got to take that music and turn it into an orchestral suite so that we can keep hearing all the good tunes you wrote. And so he did, and he wrote what's known as the Arlésienne Suite No. 1. We're actually doing Suite No. 2. And that suite, made up of 4 different parts of what the music he'd written for the play, was a huge success. It was one of the first great successes Bizet had. It was so successful that they decided they wanted to make a second suite. The problem was, and I'll get to that, Bizet dies of a heart attack at the age of 36 in 1875, a couple of years after this, and they decide they want to do the second suite in 1879. So they ended up asking his friend Giraud to put together 4 other pieces if they could, because it was so successful, and he did. And you'll hear in this these 4 pieces, a prelude, and then a little intermezzo, which has a kind of low brass sound. In the orchestral version, it sounds a bit like the Dies Irae. It sounds very foreboding in the beginning, but then this lovely melody, and it is a beautiful melody. The guy knew how to write a good tune. The third piece that's in this suite, the minuet, is actually not even from the Arlésienne Suite. It was from an earlier Bizet opera, but the guy who put it together liked the piece so much he just tossed it in there as part of the suite. And then the last one you might recognize, it's the most famous, the Farandole, and it's just a really exciting piece with all sorts of tambourines in the orchestral version. This is in the four-hand version, you can hear it in the bass. But what's interesting about this one, for the show, Bizet had actually gone to a Provençal folk book and looked up tunes, and he takes 2 of those tunes. One is called The March of the Kings, which is a Provençal Christmas carol celebrating the Epiphany and the 3 kings. You'll hear that in the beginning of the 4th one. Bum, 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 bum. And then that segues into another tune known as the Dance of the Frisky Horses, which you will hear some frisky horsing going around in that one, and it really comes to a wonderful conclusion. Now, as I mentioned, Bizet does die in 1875, but not before he gets around to writing a piece that you probably know, his opera Carmen. And you might say, well, that's the greatest piece ever, so that was good. And Bizet thought the same thing. He actually told a friend, all the critics make out that I am obscure, complicated, tedious, more fettered by technical skill than lit by inspiration. Well, this time around, I have written a work that is full of clarity and vivacity, color and melody. And of course it is, if you know Carmen. That's not what the critics thought. Believe it or not, they did not like Carmen when it first came out. Now, a lot of it had to do with what was going on stage. There were women smoking cigarettes. Carmen is not the usual damsel in distress in opera. She's a pretty powerful woman, which kind of shocked audiences. But there were critics who also complained about the music. One complained about a lack of melody. Another says, it's dull and obscure. The ear just grows weary waiting for the cadence that never comes. And sadly, Bizet wrote to that same friend, I foresee a definite and hopeless flop. And on the 30th production of that, it would only have a few more, he died of a heart attack. So when he dies, he thinks Carmen is a flop, which is a terrible thing. It then went on to become, I think, the most performed opera of all time. I love to read one review, one criticism. This was written by a librettist, Jean Dupin, to his fellow librettist, Mayac, who wrote the libretto for Carmen, and he said the following. I will not mince words. Your Carmen is a flop, a disaster. It will never play more than 20 times. The music just goes on and on and on. It never stops. There's not even time to applaud. That's not music. And your play? That's not a play. A man meets a woman. He finds her pretty. That's the first act. He loves her. She loves him. That's the second act. She doesn't love him anymore. That's the third act. He kills her. That's the fourth. You call that a play? It's a crime, do you hear me? A crime. So there were a lot of people who hated Carmen, and it's terrible to think of Bizet listening to all that, thinking he had written a beautiful, great show, and did not. There were people, of course, who loved it. Tchaikovsky thought it was great. He said one about it. Carmen is a masterpiece in every sense of the word. It's one of those rare creations which expresses the efforts of a whole musical epic. And my final quote is one that Bizet said, and you can understand why he said it. He said, "What a beautiful art music is, but what an utterly wretched profession." This is a man who really struggled, but I think you'll love this music. This is the second suite from the Arlesians. Please welcome Elizabeth Borowsky. wonderful piece, and it's always such a tragedy when these composers die, thinking they failed so miserably and left us so much great music behind. Hope everyone is still there watching, and again, if you would like to donate something to either of those causes, if you go back to the video details, there are links both to the White Horse and to Arts Asheville, and I'll be able to chat with you after at intermission if you have any questions on all of that. All right, now that of course was a piece not originally written for four-hand piano. It was an orchestral version that had been transcribed nicely for four-hand piano, as we will also hear at the end, Rhapsody in Blue, in a wonderful transcription. But the Fauré and the Beach were both written for that four-hand piano, and this was a very popular form, especially back in the late 19th, early 20th century, when there was no real recorded music, and everybody had a piano. And so the best way to sort of get music out there would be to write four-hand piano, which you can make a lot of noise, as you can hear, and also just give people a chance to perform together on a single piano. And so there's so much great four-hand music written for four-hand piano, and then arrangements of all the Beethoven and Mozart symphonies for four-hand piano, which is a really nice way to sort of hear this music outside the orchestral room. So this suite by Fauré is one of the most well-known four-hand pieces. It's known as the Dolly Suite. He wrote it between 1893 and 1896. So there are 6 little pieces. Each one of them was a gift to this girl named Dolly, and I'll explain the connection that he had to her. Fauré was actually born not that long after Bizet. Bizet, 1838, Fauré is born in 1845, so they were basically contemporaries. But whereas Bizet dies in 1875, Fauré lived all the way to 1924, the year Rhapsody in Blue was written. So he lived through a lot of changes in music, of course, lived through 20th century music, a lot of the crazy stuff happening. But he was a really forward-thinking composer. In fact, he took over the directorship of the Paris Conservatory in 1905, much to the chagrin of the old guard there, who didn't like the fact that he actually liked modern music, and they didn't think that belonged in the Paris Conservatory. So he really cleaned house there and helped some of the younger composers like Ravel get their start because he was there at the conservatory, and I think he would have liked some of where music was going. A lot of his music towards the end gets kind of dissonant and out there. Some people say he went deaf, and so maybe they thought he couldn't hear that music, but I think he was really just a very experimental sort. But this piece is very easy to love and great, great tunes. He was, his married life was a little difficult. He was engaged for several years to a woman named Marianne Viardot. She was the daughter of a well-known composer and salon hostess named Pauline Viardot, who really was the center of a lot of Paris in the mid part of the 19th century. They were engaged for something like 5 years, and she kept putting off the wedding, saying, no, let's do it later, and then she ran off with somebody else. And so poor Fauré was kind of left behind. He ended up marrying Marie Frémier, who was the daughter of a sculptor. They had 2 sons together. The problem was she didn't like music, which is hard when you're married to a composer. So they really didn't get along all that well, and we know he had many affairs, and by the end of their lives, even though they stayed married, they only communicated via post, through letters. So one of the people that we know that he had an affair with was a woman named Emma Bardock. She was a singer, and in fact, premiered a couple of Fauré songs, and would later premiere some Debussy songs. And they had an affair. She was married to a wealthy banker who didn't seem to care what was going on in her life. There was a child born around the time of the affair named Helene and nicknamed Dolly. And for many years, people thought that Dolly might have been Fauré's child. But most of the research now says the affair actually started after she was born. But he was very fond of her, very attached to this Dolly. And so he would write these little pieces as presents for Dolly. And they would not actually stay together. They would break up soon after. Interestingly, Bardock would later on have an affair with Claude Debussy and actually left her husband to marry Claude Debussy. And Debussy's wife at the time tried to kill herself in the Place de la Concorde and caused a huge scandal. So the love of the French always gets a little crazy, but there's a great deal of scandal. But Fauré, for his sake, wrote these pieces, and there are 6 of them, for occasions. So for Dolly's first birthday, he gave her the Berceuse, this lullaby that is, you might recognize. It's been used in a lot of movies as soundtrack, a very beautiful piece that actually Fauré had written about 20 years earlier under a different title, but he kind of changed things around and turned it into this lovely 4-hand lullaby for her first birthday. The second piece is called Meow, and you might think it's about a cat, but it has nothing to do with a cat. This was written for her second birthday, and interesting is she had an older brother named Raoul, and when she said his name, Monsieur Raoul, it came out as Meow. And so this was a piece making fun of the fact that she couldn't say his name, and has nothing to do with a cat, but it's a very fun piece to play. The third one is, I think, the most beautiful of all, Le Jardin de Dolly. It's Dolly's garden. They had a beautiful garden in the back that she would play in. This was a New Year's Day present in 1895. And in fact, he quotes his own violin sonata, which was a beautiful piece in the middle of this. And it's just got some beautiful, beautiful soulful harmonies in that one. The fourth one is called the Kitty Valse. So again, you might think it's about a cat. It's not. It was actually misnamed. It's supposed to be called Ketty Valse with a K-E because Ketty was the family dog. So it is about a dog, but not about a cat. And so in this, I think you can sort of hear the dog whirling around, kind of chasing his tail, having fun. So that's really the Kitty Valse. The fifth one is another soft, slow one, tendresse, tenderness. This one is sort of the most harmonically inventive, and there's some really big shifts in harmonies that he does, but very beautiful. And then the last one, a very exciting a Spanish dance, Le Pas Espagnol, which supposedly was came about because they, on the mantelpiece at their home was a statue of a Spanish bullfighter and a bull, and he thought that was very fun, and so this has a little Spanish flair to it. And of course, there was a whole Spanish thing going on, like with Bizet's Carmen around this time. One last quote that I always love about Fauré, which is so true, I think, especially for those in the Asheville area struggling to deal with the devastation. He said once, "Art, and especially music, exists to elevate us as far as possible above everyday existence." So hopefully we can elevate ourselves, and certainly for those of you in Asheville, this is for you. This is the beautiful Dolly Suite by Gabriel Fauré. Welcome back, Elizabeth Borowsky. Thank you so much. We're going to take about a 12-minute break here. We're going to come back, and we got some wonderful music by Amy Beach, and especially a wonderful arrangement of Rhapsody in Blue, and I'll come on the live chat and try to answer any questions for you in a second. So thank you, and let's take a break.